Hey, thanks, Yasmina. These webcasts are so much fun. I love doing them. So let me get my little screen sharing tool set up so you can see my screen here. Thanks again. So when it comes to combining images, in my opinion, this is where things really start to get a lot of fun in Photoshop, especially for designers, even photographers looking for more products to sell in their business. So we're going to take a look at several different ways to combine images today. And we'll start out with this image right here. So I've got a cellist, and I've faded him into sheet music. And you can see over here on the right-hand side of my screen the different layers that I have which are making that happen. So we've got an image layer on the bottom. We've got a smart object for our sheet music. And then we've got an adjustment layer that is turning our image into a black and white. So let's go ahead and close this, and let's start completely over and build it all together. So we'll start with the base image of our collage, which is going to be this cellist. Now you'll notice at the bottom of my screen you can see several images. That's because I have the mini bridge panel open, and I'm going to be accessing my images through that. In CS6 it appears at the bottom of your screen, but in CS5 back to CS4, I believe, it will appear on the right-hand panel dock of your screen. If you don't see that and you want to, you can choose the window menu, Extensions, Mini Bridge. Okay, so since I have a folder open in Mini Bridge down here, I can simply click and drag from that panel into my open document, and that will put that image into that document on its own separate layer. So when I let go of my mouse button, you see that the sheet music will appear. Now if you don't want to use the mini bridge, you can add another image to an already open Photoshop document in another way. You can simply choose File, Place, and then in the resulting dialog box you can navigate to where that image lives on your hard drive. You know, in Photoshop there's always 6 ways to do the same darn thing. So we're going to go ahead and keep using the mini bridge because it saves us a step. So we'll click and drag an image from the panel into an open document. And if there's any resizing to be done, you can go ahead and do it now. If I zoom in a little bit, you can see that Photoshop has given me these handy resizing handles just in case I need them. For this particular collage, the image is sized appropriately. So I'll go ahead and press Return, so that Photoshop places the image within my document. And then let's move it down to the bottom of our design here. And I'll do that by clicking to activate the Move tool, or you can simply press V. And I want to move the sheet music down, so I'm going to shift drag it downward. And holding the Shift key simply keeps me from moving it horizontally. Now what we're going to do is add a layer mask into which we're going to use the gradient tool, which is going to make these images appear to be softly faded together, which is one of the easiest techniques for a collage that you can use. So to add a layer mask, we're going to click the circle within a square icon at the very bottom of your Layers panel, and I'm going to resize my Photoshop realm so you can actually see that button. It's way down here, third icon to the from the left to the bottom of the Layers panel, a little circle within a square. So give that a click, and you're going to see an empty white thumbnail appear next to the layer thumbnail. And that is our layer mask. And a great way to understand what layer masks are is to think of them as digital masking tape. So just like you would mask off the baseboards in your living room, say, to paint your living room walls, then you can mask things in Photoshop, and all it does is hide them or protect them. So instead of deleting part of the sheet music image to make it look like it fades into our cellist, we're simply going to hide part of it instead. So with the layer mask active, I'm going to go over here to my Tools panel, and we're going to click the Gradient tool to activate it. Okay, the gradient, oops, I zoomed in, didn't mean to do that. That's a lot of fun. Let me center that back up again. There we go. So the gradient tool actually looks like a gradient. It's below the eraser icon in your Tools panel. And all a gradient is a soft fade from one color to another. Well, if we pop up here to the options bar and click the little gradient preview preset picker, the little downward pointing triangle, we have all these different gradient presets to pick from. But since we're going to be using this gradient inside of a layer mask, we want the third one in that top row, which will always be a black to white gradient. And the reason we're choosing that is because in the realm of the layer mask, black conceals and white reveals. Okay, black conceals, white reveals. So if we use a black to white gradient and then we click the linear gradient style over here to the right of the gradient preview, we can come over here in our document and we can begin clicking and dragging in different directions to hide parts of that image. And the great thing about this is if you are nonplussed with your first professional gradient dragging attempts, you can just keep dragging as I am here from different spots within the image and you'll get different results. So if at first you don't succeed, try again. So what's happening here is I'm drawing a line to tell Photoshop how wide I want the fade to be. The longer the line, the softer the fade. And you can see that updating here on our screen. The shorter you draw that line, the decreased width of that transition point. Okay, so the fade will be much harsher. It won't ever be a hard edge because the gradient tool cannot produce a hard edge, but it may look close. So to blend two images together in this way, you just want to start your drag a little bit below the edge of the photo, okay? And then it's up to you how far you drag it. You know, it's your collage, so make it look good to you. And as you can see, after a few dragging attempts, then I've got something that looks pretty nice. Do be aware, like I said a moment ago, of that hard photo edge of the sheet music. For example, this photo ends about right here, so you want to make sure that you start your dragging below that so that you don't keep that hard edge in your collage. But this is looking pretty good to me. The next thing I might want to do is make the color a little bit more cohesive between the two images that I'm fading together here. So I'm going to easily fix that by using a black and white adjustment layer. So we'll trot up to the layer menu, and now we're going to come down to New Adjustment Layer. And adjustment layers is simply your way of telling Photoshop, hey Photoshop, this next change or adjustment that I'm going to make to this image, please, if you would be so kind, put it on its own layer. That builds in a lot of editing flexibility in your document, so you can throw the darn thing away if you don't like what you did, or you can lower the opacity if it's a bit too strong, so on and so forth. So we'll choose Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and come over here to the menu and choose Black and White. Photoshop will kindly ask what you'd like to name it. We're just going to let it roll with Black and White 1 because that's a pretty descriptive layer name. Now the Properties panel opens. Now these are the same set of sliders that you'll see in the Adjustments panel in CS5 and CS4. So what we can do here is decide if we like the black and white. That may be fine for our particular collage, or we can take it a step further and click this tint button right here towards the top. And Photoshop is immediately going to add the most popular tint to date, which is a sepia or a brown overlay. But you're not stuck with that brown. If you want to experiment with something else, say something in the blue realm, then all you have to do is click that little checkbox next, or the color swatch rather, next to the word tint. So give it a single click and Photoshop will open the color picker. Now the color picker takes a few clicks, but you can use it to reset your color chips or your color overlay in this situation. So we're going to use this rainbow color bar here to tell Photoshop the range of colors that we want. So if we want something in the blue hues or blue range, then we can click within that blue area. Then you can use this larger area on the left of the rainbow bar to tell Photoshop how light or how dark you want that color to be. So if we want something very subtle that will look like a black and white, but it won't really be a black and white, it'll have a little bit of blue in it, then in my opinion that gives you a richer tone and the image just looks a whole lot better. Interesting to note, most black and whites that you see framed in galleries aren't black and whites at all. They're black and white with the slightest hint of another color, say a very, very light blue and so on. So we can click OK when we're done, and then we can click the little right-facing triangles to collapse our Properties panel. And now the last thing I might want to do to this image is give it a nice soft edge vignette, a little darkened edge vignette. And that's easily done with a filter. But filters only run on single layers. So what we need to do is somehow get all three of these layers we have going on into one layer onto which we can run a filter. But we want to keep our ability to tweak what we've done if we want to later. So what we're going to do is shift-click to activate all the layers that are in our Layers panel. And then we're going to Control-click on a Mac or right-click on a PC near the layer name. Not over here near the thumbnail, because you'll get a different menu and you'll be completely confused. But you want to right-click or Control-click to the right of the layer name. And when you get that menu, we're going to choose Convert to Smart Object. And poof, Photoshop compresses all of those layers into another layer onto which we can run filters. So now we can trot up to the Filter menu, choose Lens Correction, and this is a fabulous way to make that darkened edge vignette. And I put that edge vignette on nearly every portrait that I do professionally. Here in CS6 and CS5, you're going to need to click the Custom tab once this Lens Correction dialog box opens. In CS, I think 4 and earlier, you don't have that Custom tab, so you can skip that step. But what we're looking for here is this section right here called Vignette. And when you find it, you're simply going to click and drag the Amount slider all the way to the left and call it done. Now we can click OK, and we've got quite a beautiful collage that, at least in my opinion, is sellable in your photography business or great for an ad, okay, if you're a designer. Now let's go ahead and close that document, and let's take a look at another idea. We're going to be doing these techniques a couple of times for repetition so that they all sink in. So here's another idea, great for a photography studio. So we're going to go ahead and close this and recreate it together. So we'll start, let me scroll over in my mini bridge here. We'll start with the mom. And now let's go ahead and click and drag the baby or the other image into that Photoshop document. Again, I'm clicking and dragging from the mini bridge, but you could easily choose File, Place to navigate to another image. I don't need to resize it, so I'm going to go ahead and press Return. Now what I want to do is arrange the elements in my collage. I'm going to press V to activate the Move tool and Shift drag to the left to scoot our baby over a little bit, temporarily turn off the visibility of him, and double-click my background layer to make it editable, so Photoshop will let me move the darn thing, because if you try to move a locked background layer, it will squawk at you. So now that we've got the elements in our collage sort of positioned, we'll go ahead and turn the baby back on. Now we're going to do the exact same thing we did a moment ago. We're going to add a layer mask by clicking the circle within a square icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. You see that nice white thumbnail over there. Now we're going to go over to the Tools panel and again grab the Gradient tool or simply press G. Take a peek in the options bar at the top of your screen and make sure that that gradient preview is set to a black to white gradient. If it's anything else, then just click that downward pointing triangle and click that third preset in the top row. Now that third preset is always going to be here. You would have to jump through about 10 hoops to get rid of it. So don't worry, it's going to be there. We'll click the little triangle again to collapse that. Check to make sure that you've got linear gradient style active by clicking that button. And unless you've changed these, it probably is set to linear gradient anyway. So now let's come over to our image. Check to make sure that we still have our layer mask active, and we know it's active because it has that extra little corner bracket around all sides. And now we're going to do exactly what we did earlier. We're going to click and drag to begin experimenting with our collage here. And it's so simple. And the great thing about using this layer mask is, like we saw earlier, you can just keep clicking and dragging it from different angles to create different effects. So you don't always have to be dragging in the direction that I'm doing it here. Different images, you'll want to blend them together in different ways. So now let's do our quick color change to bring the colors into line with each other between these two photos. So we'll do that again by adding a black and white adjustment layer. So trot up to the top of your screen and choose Layer, New Adjustment Layer. And again, we're going to choose black and white. Click OK. And I'll just close that little panel so you can see what the black and white looks like. And now once you've closed the either Adjustments panel or Properties panel, To reopen them, all you have to do is double-click the layer thumbnail of that adjustment layer to open it back up. So with a quick double-click, I get all of my sliders back that I can use to tweak contrast to this collage, or I can turn on the tint checkbox. Now it looks like the only thing we need to do to finish off this collage is do a little bit of cropping because our images were a different size. But to be honest with you, I'm just going to click to activate the baby layer and summon Free Transform to resize it manually, because enlarging an image just a hair like we're going to do here to fill up the rest of the canvas space, you're not going to be able to discern any quality loss. Okay, so we'll choose Free Transform or press Command or Control T on a PC and then Shift drag any corner handle diagonally outward to increase in size, and then press Return to let Photoshop know that you're finished with the transform. And then if we wanted to add that oh-so-romantic soft dark edge vignette, we're going to activate all the layers by clicking one and then shift-clicking the last one. And then we're going to Control or right-click near the layer name, again not on the layer thumbnail because you will not get the same menu. Then we're going to choose Convert to Smart Object, which gives us one layer from many. And then we can come up here to our filter menu. The previous filter that you run is always listed at the top of that menu, but we'll go ahead and go into the dialog box so you can see it again. Now I mentioned in CS5 and 6 you do need to click the Custom tab because that's where the vignette slider is. In previous versions, the vignette slider is just root level when you enter this dialog box. So now we're going to click and drag it to the left and click OK, and we've got a nice soft darkened edge vignette. And just to give you an idea of a couple of more techniques that you can do, or images, this particular ad was designed with the same gradient mask technique, but as you can see, I've faded 3 image layers together, not just 2. So you can fade as many of them together as you want. Here's another example, just different things that you can do with it. Great for designers and photographers. All right, let's take a look at another way to produce a collage. This is what we're going to create. And this time we're going to hand paint it. So let's say that you want to fade your images together, but they don't really lend themselves to a gradient. Okay, so this time we're going to hand paint around his helmet so that we can see the softball, or the baseball rather, that's on the layer underneath. So let's go ahead and close this and let's rebuild it together. So I'll open one image and then either click and drag from Mini Bridge or choose File Place to place the other images. Press Return or resize it if you need to. I'm going to go ahead and arrange my collage. I'm going to scoot that baseball over, and I'm going to double click our ball player and scoot him over a little bit. Now I need to think about layer stacking order. It's going to be easier for me to do the hand painting if I can see the baseball player. So I'm going to go ahead and drag his layer thumbnail to the top of my layer stack. Sometimes when you're creating collages like this, you might want to drop the opacity layer a little bit. Might help you see the areas in which you need to paint around. Okay, we'll go ahead and bring that back up. So now let's do what we did a moment ago. Let's add our layer mask by clicking our circle within a square icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. Now this time, instead of using the gradient tool, we're going to press B to grab the regular old brush tool. Now, we said earlier that in the realm of the layer mask, black conceals and white reveals. You can really think of it as masking tape in the real physical world is blue or beige, right? Well, in Photoshop, it's black. Okay, so that might help you remember it a little bit. So what we want to do now is we want to set that paintbrush to paint with black. And the way you do that is by setting black as your foreground color chip. Your color chips live at the bottom of your Tools panel. And a couple of keyboard shortcuts can make this really fast when you get into doing this a lot. If you press the D key, you will reset your color chips to the default of black and white. And then you can press the X key to flip-flop your color chips so that black is on top. You can also click the little color chip icon that's directly above your foreground color chip to reset your color chips to the default of black and white. And then you can also use that tiny curved arrow to flip-flop your color chips if you like. But the keyboard shortcuts really do, speed you up in Photoshop. So now we need to set up our brush. So let's trot up to the options bar and click the downward pointing triangle to the right of our brush preset picker. And our goal here is not to set brush size, but it's to set brush edge softness. What we want is a nice soft fluffy brush so that the hiding that we're going to do through painting with black has a soft edge so the images blend well together. So you just want to choose one of these soft looking brushes, not one of the hard edge brushes, but the soft edge brush. And again, it doesn't matter which one, because we're going to come over here to our document and we're going to learn about keyboard shortcuts for setting brush size, because again, that will make you a little bit faster in Photoshop. The right bracket key on your keyboard will increase brush size. You can see the size of my brush is pretty big here. It's about 600 pixels. And the left bracket will decrease brush size. And those brackets are found by the P key on your keyboard, P for Paul McCartney. Might be a few people's favorite Beatle. Okay, so now we've got a soft edge brush. We've got black as our foreground color chip. Now we can mouse over to our image. We're going to take one last peek in our layers panel to make sure that our layer mask is active, because we don't want to be adding black paint to our baseball player. Okay, and again, you know the mask is active because it has that bracket around it. So now we can just begin to paint. And as you can see, we can very quickly create our own kind of custom collage. And I'll use the left bracket key to go down in brush size just to get around his hat a little bit here, or his helmet rather. And then the great thing about this is if I mess up too much, or I mess up and I paint too much, then do I have to start over? Heck no. All you have to do is think about that rhyme. If black conceals and white reveals, if I want to reveal that part of his face that I didn't mean to paint over, then all I need to do is press X to flip-flop my color chip so that white is on top. And then I can come back in and recover or reveal that area. So these techniques are incredibly forgiving. But I will say that this is something that you don't ever want to let your clients watch you do, because it will be very, very fast. And, you know, if you're charging by the hour, you may not want them to see how fast it takes you or how fast you can do it, rather. Here again, let's do a little color change so we can bring the colors of these photos in line. We're going to do something a little bit different this time. I'm going to reset my color chips to the default of black and white, and I'm going to peek at them to make sure black is on top. Because we're going to create a black and white adjustment layer, but in a different way than we did before. So we're going to come up to the Layer menu, choose New Adjustment Layer, and this time, instead of black and white, we're going to choose Gradient Map. Now, Gradient Map simply is going to say, hey, Photoshop, I want you to map the shadows in my image to one color in the gradient that I've picked, and in our case, that's going to be black. And then it's going to map the highlights of our image to the other color in our gradient, which in our case is white. And in my opinion, this is going to create hands down the most beautiful contrast-riddled black and white image of any technique that you can perform in Photoshop outside of using a third-party plugin to convert your image to black and white. My favorite of that bunch is Nik Software's Silvery Effects. It's quite amazing. So we'll go ahead and choose a gradient map, and Photoshop asks you if you like to name it, and we'll go ahead and let it roll with its name. So we've got a nice high contrasty black and white collage going on here. One more variation on this technique would be to drop the opacity of the gradient map adjustment layer that we just made. That will bring back a little bit of the color of these two images for a grungy effect. Okay, so I just did that with I had the gradient map adjustment layer active, and then I just dropped the opacity to about 65%. But again, what looks good to you? So several different variations on this. Again, great for ads or photography business. So let's close that one up, and let's create another one. Now, I don't know if y'all know about it, but there really are lawnmower races in Texas. It's pretty hysterical, I must say. But, you know, since we're covering all sports here, let's take a look at how to create this collage. So we'll start out with our lawnmowers. You can almost hear people hollering, yeehaw! And then we'll go ahead and use Mini Bridge to click and drag the image into our Photoshop document. This time I'm going to cheat and enlarge him a little bit. And you know, Photoshop is getting so much better at enlargements that you just don't have to worry quite as much about enlarging photos. Now, if I was doing this for a client, I really would start out with a larger image so I wouldn't have to enlarge it quite as much as you're seeing me do it here. But a lot of times you won't really be able to tell that you've done the enlargement. So we'll go ahead and press return. So now we're going to add our layer mask. So click the circle within a square at the bottom of the Layers panel. We already have our brush tool active. Our foreground color chip is already set to black. We've already peeked at our options bar to make sure that we have a nice soft edge brush. And then we're going to come over to our document, press and hold the right bracket key to increase brush size or the left bracket key to decrease brush size, and simply paint across the area that you'd like to hide in order to blend those two images together. And again, if you want to come in here and be a little bit more precise, then you'll want to decrease brush size quite a bit and take a lot longer and all that kind of good stuff. Now let's do our quick color change again. Let's take a peek at our color chips at the bottom of the Tools panel. Make sure that black is on top and white is on bottom. Now we'll come up to the Layer menu, choose New Adjustment Layer, Gradient Map. Click OK. We've got a beautiful black and white gradient going on, gorgeous conversion. And again, I think this makes the prettiest black and white images outside, like I said, of using a plugin like Nik Software's Silver Effects. And I do believe I have a leftover prize from Nik Software. If we want to give that away, we can do that at the end of our session here, and I'll have those ready for you. So now let's go ahead and drop our opacity on the gradient map adjustment layer a little bit to give it a little bit of a unique creative color effect. And the great thing about all this is, of course, you will save this as a native Photoshop document. You will choose File, Save As, and in the resulting dialog box, you're going to make sure to choose Photoshop as the format. That keeps all of these layers intact, so if you ever have to go back and edit them, you don't have to start over. And then if you need to, let's say, send this image off to an online print lab or your local camera store or what have you to get it printed, then you'll pop open this Photoshop document and you'll export JPEGs as you need them. Okay, so you always want to keep this master Photoshop document around for editing. Okay, let's keep cruising on. Let's take a look at another way to combine images. This one is you may find is a little bit easier, okay, because we're going to use layer blend modes for this. So this is what we're going to create here. If you take a peek in the Layers panel, you can see I've got a girl on a snowboard, and here in Boulder, Colorado, people are anxiously awaiting snow. Still feels like summer though. And I've added another illustration, and I've changed the layer blend mode, which is found in a pop-up menu toward the top of the Layers panel. And layer blend modes simply let you change how color interacts on one layer, blends with or cancels out color on other layers. So I'm not going to go through all the different blend modes unless y'all all run screaming out your front door. But what we're going to be doing here is playing around with two different categories. They're not really categories, but there is a little line in between each one that divvies them up into sections, so it's easy to think of them as categories. Anything in the darken category will produce a darker image than you started out with. So since our original image has a very light background, we're going to add another image on top of it, and we're going to change it to one of these blend modes in the darken category. The next category down starts with lighten. Anything in that category will produce a lighter image than you started out with. Basically, in these two categories, if you choose something in darken category, Photoshop says, okay, I'm going to look at all the colors on one layer and all the colors on the other layer, and the darkest colors between the two win. Okay, everything else will drop right out. Great way to knock out a white background instantly, and we'll look at that here in a second. Then you've got the opposite going on with the lighten category. Photoshop looks at the colors on one layer, looks at the colors on the other layer, and only the lightest colors hang around. Everything that's dark will drop right out. So let's take a look at that in action. I'll go ahead and close this document, and we'll start with our snowboarder girl. See how light that background is? Kind of boring, but our subject's really great. So let's see if we can't spice it up with a little bit of texture. So let's go ahead and drag in this snowflake image, and I'm going to cheat again a little bit and Shift Option drag on a Mac or Shift Alt drag on a PC to resize this new snowflake background from the inside out. Okay, press Return when you're finished. Now we're going to come over here to the Layers panel, and we're going to take that pop-up menu that is set to normal, and we're going to change it to Linear Burn. Okay, so Photoshop looked at the colors on one layer and looked at the colors on the second layer, and the darkest colors are what remain. Now I don't want my snowflakes to darken her face, so we'll add a layer mask. Press B to grab the brush tool. Take a peek at your color chips. Our foreground color chip is still set to black, which is what we want. And we can paint across her face to hide this new background from her face area. Use our bracket keys to resize our brush cursor, and we can hide those new snowflakes from everywhere except the background and her snowboard. And of course, again, if you were doing this for real, you would take a whole lot more time, right? If you're paid by the hour. And that's all there is to it. You might want to drop the opacity of that snowflake layer if it darkens your image too much. So let's take a look at the exact same technique using one of the blend modes in the Lighten category. So for this one, we're starting out with a dark background. So we're going to lighten it up by using a Lighten mode. So we'll go ahead and close that, and we'll start with our cute girl's image. Scroll over in our mini bridge, click and drag to add the stars. I'm going to spin this one around because it's going to work out a little bit better. I'm going to position my cursor a little bit outside of the corner, and if you press and hold the Shift key, you will rotate that item in 90-degree increments, or you can get it to 90 degrees really, really easily. So now we're just going to increase the size of it a little bit by Shift Option dragging on a Mac or Shift Alt dragging on a PC. Press Return when we're finished. Now let's change the layer blend mode on this one to Screen. So now we've got a much lighter image than we started out with. We're going to drop the opacity on that just a little bit, and then we'll add a layer mask to that layer as well. We've already got our brush tool active. Take a peek at our color chips. If black conceals and white reveals, we need to flip-flop our color chips so that black is on top. Now we can come over here and we can hide that color change from the focal point. All kinds of fun ways to combine images in Photoshop. And this is just, I love doing this. I absolutely love it. So here's another example. Now this one, if I turn off the visibility of the new layer that I added, you'll see that our little rocker is on a solid white background. Well, all I did was bring in these blue rays, and since the blue rays are darker than white, the blend mode of darker color worked perfectly, because the darker color blend mode really doesn't do any blending. It just makes white disappear. Same thing with lighter color on the opposite end of that. Okay, so anytime you've got a white background to delete, try one of these blend modes in the darken category. Likewise, if you've got a black background that you want to delete, such as the black behind this ball of flame here, then you can use something in the lighten category. Okay, so if you want to drop out white, use something in the darken category, because the darkest colors win. If you want to drop out black, use something in the lighten category, because the lightest colors win. So you can see very easily, I only had to add a layer mask and hide one little bit of the flame right here to make that flame look like it's appearing in that sphere. So blend modes are incredibly powerful. Here's one more example, more toward the designer end of things. If you take a peek in my layers panel over here, you can see that I've got the little boy on a layer, and I'll turn off these other guys so you can see. So here's our little boy. I used a threshold adjustment layer to make him a high contrast black and white. I brought in some vector artwork, or an illustration rather, and then I brought in some blue rays, and then I added some text and a bar of color at the bottom to highlight the URL. Great that's a great design tip for you right there. But as I click on the blue rays, you can see its blend mode is set to linear burn. That's what's getting rid of that white background behind that our little rocker kid there. So blend modes are fabulous. And in my book, Photoshop CS6 The Missing Manual, all of this is stepped out step by step by step. And of course, this video is going to be uploaded so you guys can use it. Okay, now let's take a look at yet another way to combine images. So what we've got here, if you look at my layers panel, I'm going to click on each of those layers, and you can see I'm not using blend modes to combine them, nor do you see any kind of layer masking. So how, for the love of Asgard, did I drop out the black background behind that matrix zeros and ones? Can you even imagine trying to make a selection of that? Heck no. So let's go ahead and close that. We're going to open up our hippie dude, our surprised hippie dude, and click and drag from mini bridge to add our matrix zeros and ones on top of it. Resize if necessary. Press return to let Photoshop know you're finished with the resize. And now this time, we're going to use Photoshop's advanced blending sliders to make that black background go away. So there's a couple of different ways you can get at those sliders. You could click the Effects button at the bottom of your Layers panel and choose Blending Options, or you can simply, not do that. Well, usually when you double-click the layer thumbnail, see what I mean? I did that on purpose. I double-clicked the layer thumbnail and absolutely nothing happened, right? That was bad. But double-clicking near the layer name, I get the layer style blending options, which is what I wanted. So again, that is to double-click near the layer name or choose blending options from the Effects button at the bottom of your Layers panel. Now what we're going to do is pay attention to this area down at the bottom, okay? It's a section called Blend If. So you'll hear this technique called Blend If sliders or advanced blending sliders. So you can tell Photoshop to drop out a specific color by using these sliders down here. I'll move my dialog box out of the way. If I click and drag the shadow slider to the right, I begin to drop out all of the colors that you see in this grayscale bar, okay? So it's dropping them all out. You could drag this slider far enough to completely eradicate the black, okay? So that's the first part of the magic. If you wanted to drop out white, you could drag from the highlights end leftward on this slider. Now, if I zoom into the image, you can see that I've still got a little black loitering around the edges of those zeros and ones. Well, another trick that you can use on these blending sliders is if you hold down a modifier key, it's Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC, you can split that slider apart, and when you do, Photoshop will make the colors in between those two split sliders partially transparent. So you get a much better blending between the thing that you're knocking the background out of and the image underneath it that you're blending it with. Okay, so you can experiment with these sliders to get rid of that black background that we started out with and click OK. And the super great thing about this is, once again, if you save this document as a native Photoshop document so your layers remain intact, you can go back and adjust those blending sliders anytime you want by clicking that tiny little icon that has just appeared to the right of that layer. That lets you know that, hey, there has been some advanced blending voodoo applied to this layer. So you can just double-click that to open that back up, and you can see our sliders are still intact. Now you'll notice there's a pop-up menu above those sliders. You're not limited to only knocking out black and white or gray with this method. You can access all of your color channels here. So if you want to get rid of a red background, choose red. If you want to get rid of green, choose green, and so on and so forth. So let's close this and let's take a look at that exact same technique on another image. This time we're going to blend a photo of lightning in with this dancer guy. Okay, I'm sure some of you have wondered how designers are able to do that. So we'll open our first image, and now we'll click and drag the other image into our document. It showed up super tiny. There we go. We'll call that good. And again, if I was doing this for real, I would make sure that my images matched in size and resolution. So I'm going to use my Move tool to position the lightning kind of where I think I want it to appear. And then we're going to double click near the layer name to open the layer style blending options. And again, we're going to click and drag that shadow slider to the right. Move my box out of the way. And then we're going to hold down a modifier key, Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC, to split the slider so that it makes the edges more transparent so that the blending looks more realistic. And there's no magic position for these sliders. It just depends on the image that you're working with. Okay? So then we'll say OK. And then if I needed to, I've still got the Move tool active, I could reposition my lightning anywhere I want. And I just think that is the coolest dadgum thing since sliced bread. I just want to say that. Okay, so now let's take a look at another way to combine images. This is a tried and true, oh so romantic collage technique that every photographer should be using in their business. And when you start thinking about collages when you're doing photo shoots, you can start planning for them. So for example, you could shoot a view of the entire wedding area and blend it with something like this. So let's start over so we can do it all together. We'll start with our beach, and we'll add our oh so romantic couple. There we go. Use the Move tool to kind of center them. Now what we want to do is we want to create an oval selection, and there are a couple of different ways you can do that. You can use the elliptical marquee tool. Okay, so let's just have a go with that. Then you can click and drag diagonally downward to create a selection while you still have your mouse button depressed. If you want to move that selection around on your screen, you can press and hold the space bar, and then when I drag my mouse, I'm moving the selection. But the trick to doing that is to never release the mouse button. Okay, so when you get it just right, you can release all the buttons you may have held down. And now we're going to add a layer mask. So we're going to click the circle within a square icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. Now this is looking pretty good, but we need our edges to be softer. So what I'm going to do is double click the mask icon. In CS6, that's going to open the Properties panel. If you're in CS5 or CS4, that's going to open the Masks panel. Same sliders, different panel name. That's how Adobe keeps us on our toes. So you can see that we have a feather slider here. So to make that vignette oh so romantic and soft, all we have to do is drag that feather slider. And the great thing here again is that is feathering on the fly non-destructively. Say this is a Photoshop document, you print it or you give it to your client and they're like, oh, that's really nice, but can you feather it a little bit more? You pop open this document, you don't let them see you do this, and you simply double-click the mask icon to open this panel and you adjust the slider. That's working smarter, folks, and not harder. So let's take a look at the same thing on another image. This time we're going to build this. And this time we'll use a different tool for our shape. Okay, so we've combined both images into the same Photoshop document on separate layers. Now this time let's use the Ellipse tool. Now this is one of Photoshop's vector tools, and the benefit of using a vector tool is that if we wanted to, we could resize the mask infinitely and never mess up our edges. It would never get pixelated because vectors can be sized as much as you want. Make them bigger, smaller all day long, and the edge quality is never going to degrade. Okay, so we're going to, or degrade rather. So we're going to choose the Ellipse tool. Now you do need to make sure that you put it in path mode. In CS6, there is a mode pop-up menu at the left of the options bar when you have one of the vector shape tools active. So we're going to choose path. In previous versions of the program, you'll see a set of icons, and path is in the middle. Okay? Because we don't really want to create a shape layer. All we want is the shape itself. Then we will use that to create a vector mask. So here again, we can click and drag diagonally on our image to draw the shape. Again, while you're holding down the mouse button, you can press and hold the space bar to move it around. Okay, so let's say this is good right here. Now you'll see that nothing happened in my image. Nothing happened in the Layers panel. The only thing that happened in the image preview here is I have a thin gray outline. That's totally fine. The next step is you want to hold down a modifier key as you add the layer mask. And that's going to tell Photoshop to add a vector mask, which is resizable without quality loss, instead of a pixel-based mask that, like we just added when we used the elliptical marquee. So let's go ahead and press and hold the Command key or Control on a PC. And as you do that and you hover over the mask icon, the little tool tag that comes up will actually say Add Vector Mask instead of, Add Mask. So we're going to do that. The mask looks a little bit different. Instead of being filled with black, it's filled with gray. And again, you can click that mask, use Free Transform to change the size of the mask itself without losing quality. But let's go ahead and add our feathering. So we can double-click the mask icon to open the Masks panel, and then we've got that great feather control there. So just a little bit of an updated technique. Okay, so you can either use the elliptical marquee or you can use the elliptical shape tool, and the benefit of using the latter is that you can resize this mask without having to worry that the edges are going to get funky. Okay. So that's a fun one. Now let's take a look at using a little bit more advanced technique. We're going to use the Refine Edge dialog box here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create this collage. And as you can see, our mother and daughter were on a white background. Okay, so we're going to make their vacation a little bit more interesting, arguably, by putting them in front of the Eiffel Tower. So let's go ahead and close this image, and we'll start with our family here. So to use the Refine Edge dialog box to get rid of a background, and arguably we could have a go at this one with blend modes because the background is predominantly white, but I want to show you a different technique here. So we're going to start out with a rough selection. So we're going to do that by using the Quick Selection tool. The Quick Selection tool lets you paint on a selection, and if you have a nice amount of contrast between the foreground and the background, and we do, then this tool will do a great job. It uses a brush cursor, so we can use our left and right bracket keys to adjust cursor size. And I will tell you that as you click and drag or click with this tool, the size of the area that's being selected, because Photoshop is grabbing areas of similar color, is directly proportionate to the size of the brush. So when we want to create a selection of her arm over here, we need to go down in brush size quite a bit. Or Photoshop will just grab too big of an area, and then we'd have to try to subtract that from the selection. Okay, so we've got a pretty good selection going on. Since I did mention subtracting from a selection, I'm going to add a little bit more to our selection right there. There we go. You can put this tool in subtract mode by using the third little brush icon in your options bar. It looks like a brush with a minus sign above it. If we had too much in our selection, then we could subtract it by painting with that tool. Okay? Or you can also go into that mode by holding down a modifier key. It's Option on a Mac. See how the icon inside the brush cursor changed from a plus to a minus? So it's Option on a Mac or Alt on the PC, and that will subtract from a selection. But the selection we've got here is pretty good. So now let's go ahead and click the Refine Edge button in our options bar. Now for you to see that Refine Edge button, two things have to be happening in your document. First, you have to have an active selection on your screen, and that means marching ants. Second, you need to have one of Photoshop's selection tools active. Okay, so if you switch to another tool, you may not see that Refine Edge button, so don't let that throw you. Okay, so just click back to activate a selection tool. So we're going to click that button to open what I think is the most amazing tool in Photoshop to date, and this sucker just keeps getting better with every version of the program. What we're going to do is we're going to set our view mode to overlay. Okay, so I'm going to click the down pointing triangle next to the view preview and choose that second one. That's going to give us a red overlay atop our image. And if I zoom in by pressing Command or Control plus, I can clearly see which parts are not yet in my selection. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on Smart Radius, and then I'm going to drag this slider to the right, roughly the amount of pixels that I want Photoshop to look at outside of my original selection edge. So this is a fairly low resolution image, so I'm going to tell it, hey, take a peek about 10 to 15 pixels outside of my original selection and just reanalyze it, if you would, to see if I missed anything. Well, I can still see that I have areas that need to be in my selection that aren't yet. So I can refine them by clicking this cryptic looking icon to the left of the Smart Radius checkbox, and you want to choose the Refine Radius tool. What that is going to let us do is come over to our document and physically paint across the areas that we need to refine. Now as I do that, I'm going to zoom in so you can see. See how this area right here is red, so that means it is not yet in our selection. But if I paint over it, and I'm even painting in the hair, because you can see some of the white background in her hair, when I release the mouse button, Photoshop analyzes the part that I painted over. Now if anybody has ever tried to use this dialog box before to no avail, I will tell you that in my experience, the only way to get good results from this dialog box is to physically do what I'm doing here with this Refine Radius tool. That really is where the magic lies. Okay? Turn on Smart Radius, tell Photoshop roughly how far outside that original edge you want it to reanalyze, and then you're going to have to use this Refine Radius tool to manually go around the edges. There's just no way around it. So I've met people who say, oh, that tool doesn't really do anything. But that's because they're not doing what we're doing here. They're not painting. See how Photoshop is fixing all those areas? And again, I'm painting in her hair to have it look at the background that's appearing inside of her hair. Okay, I've got a little bit of a problem area on her hand here. And anything that you can't fix, you can always go back with the layer mask that we're about to add and fine tune it. So because part of her jacket is white here, I'm never going to be able to fix that with the Refine Edge dialog box, but I can dang sure fix it by hand back in the layer mask. So when you're doing stuff like this in Photoshop, it really is all about trying to get as far as you can with the technique with the automatic tools, and then fine tune by hand as little as possible. Okay, so we're going to come over here to her hand and fine tune that area. I'm using the space bar to move around within my image while I'm zoomed in. I'm clicking and holding the space bar. So let's call this one good. I do have down here in the Adjust Edge section, I've got a smooth of 2 pixels set. Experiment with that. There really are no magic numbers on here. I don't want any feathering for this particular technique, so I've got that off. And I've got contrast off. That just lets you bump up the contrast of the edge of your selection a little bit. And then if I needed to, I could make my selection edge or my selection larger or smaller by shifting it. And that's just, you can think of that as contracting or expanding a selection. The next thing I'm going to do is set the output menu to Layer Mask. Say OK. Photoshop adds a layer mask to my image. We're looking pretty good here. And now we're going to click and drag our new background into the document. I'll zoom out a little bit so we can see it. Click within the image to place it. Press Return when you're finished. And now we're going to change layer stacking order so that our mother and daughter are in front of the Eiffel Tower. Now you'll remember that I do have a few areas to fix, like her arm and just a little bit right here and on her side. So we're going to zoom in quite a bit by pressing Command or Control+. Use our space bar to move over to the area we need to fix. Click to activate the layer mask. Press B to grab the brush tool. Use our bracket keys. Think about our rhyme, black conceals, white reveals. Take a peek at your color chips. We've got black as the foreground, white as the background. That's what we want. And then we can come over here, zoom really far in, get a really tiny brush, and then we can fix those areas that we couldn't get perfect using the Refine Edge dialog box. Takes a little bit of work, but definitely worth it in the end. And we'll cruise over here a little bit, fix this area. I'm using white because I want to reveal what's on the original layer. Black conceals. So if I mess up and reveal too much, press X to flip-flop color tips and fix that area. So now we've got a nice collage going on. I want to show you that one more time just for the sake of repetition. This is what we're going to create. You can see in my layers panel over here that I've got 2 different layers. She's on a blue background. Okay, so let's take a look at how to do that one. I'll open up our Supergirl here. Again, we're going to start out with a rather rough selection based on color with the quick selection tool because we have nice contrast between the foreground and the background. Use our bracket keys to resize our brush. Remember that the size of the area that Photoshop is grabbing in these selections is directly proportional to brush size. Okay? So now here's a good usage of putting the quick selection tool in subtract mode because I didn't mean to select this area right here. So I'm going to go down in brush size even more, press and hold Option on the Mac or Alt on a PC, and paint across that area to remove it from my selection and then add in her thumb there. Okay, we're not going to worry about these wisps. We'll let the Refine Edge dialog box help us with that because that really is its strength. Wispy bits, fur and hair, things like that. We've already got our view set to the overlay, and that just lets us see the areas that are not yet in our selection. We're going to turn on Smart Radius. We're going to guess as to how far out we want Photoshop to look, and we're going to come over here and grab that magic tool, Refine Radius tool, come over to our image and physically paint across the areas that we want Photoshop to reanalyze and thus include in our selection. And again, you can paint inside that hair. And Photoshop will start looking between the strands. I'm going to paint a little bit in that area right there. I mean, this is looking darn good to me. So now we're going to come down here from the Output To menu. We're going to choose Layer Mask. We're going to click OK. Now we're going to click and drag our new background from our mini bridge into the Photoshop document. Grab my Move tool to reposition our Golden Gate. Use Free Transform to resize it just a little bit. Change layer stacking order. And there we've got our beautiful collage. So those are all the techniques that I have for you today. There are oodles and gobs more in the book, Photoshop CS6, The Missing Manual. Another super important thing I want to tell you before we break for questions, if we have any, is that I have another free class happening next week. Okay, so you can go to the URL Lesa, LESA.in/CL videos, and that was on the opening graphics that you saw while Yasmina was so kindly introducing me. But these seminars are completely free while they're live. The videos are available for a very small fee after the class. So on September 17th, rather, I'm going to be doing a full day on selections. It's a webinar. On September 18th, I'll be doing a full day on adjustment layers, and on September 19th, I'll be doing a full day on smart objects. If you forget the URL or you can't find where to enroll in these courses, pop me an email, Lesa, L-E-S-A, @photolesa.com. So now I'm going to come back over here to Photoshop and see if we have any questions.
Great, Webcast Lesa, and we do have several questions that have come in, as you can imagine. Did you want to look at them and take them, or would you like me just to read them for you?
Reading them works better for me, thank you.
Okay, we'll take some that came in earlier in the beginning of the event. Keith had a question. Will these techniques work in Elements too?
Most of them, yes. Most of them, yeah. Yeah, because in Elements, you've got almost all the same adjustment layers that you do here in Photoshop. The only thing that you're not going to have in Elements is that Properties panel or the Masks panel wherein you can set a feather on the fly like with the slider. Elements doesn't have that. But Elements has full feathering. So let's say you create an elliptical marquee and you want to use that technique, then I believe, I can't remember what menu it's under, maybe Modify in Elements, but there is a feather command so you can feather the edge of that selection to create those kinds of tutorials. And if you're using Elements 9 or later, I think it's 9. It could be elements 10. I'm pretty sure it's 9 though. You have real layer masks. So all of those gradient techniques that we did when we were blending images, these guys back here, you can do all of that in elements. Great question.
Perfect. And a question from Bob that just came in and it's related to what you were just showing us. Bob says, on your last selection, there seems to be a halo effect around the flying girl. How do you get rid of this or just not have it show?
Oh, okay. Well, what you could do, there's a couple of different ways to do that. I can see what he's talking about right down here. You could click to activate the mask, and you could use the minimize filter. So click to activate the mask, choose filter, other, minimum. And what this does is it's going to shrink the mask a little bit. You want to set the radius to 1 pixel. So I'll turn the preview off and on, and you can see how that mask has just shrunk enough to get rid of that halo. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is, I'll open this image back up over here. Let me get rid of all these guys. There we go. When I made the rough selection, I'll just do it real fast here. You can come in here, and after you did all the painting around the edges and so on and so forth, you can come down here to the decontaminate colors checkbox in the output section. If you turn that on and then adjust the amount, Photoshop will try to make sure that none of those edge halos are still left around. Your success with that is going to vary, but it's all about knowing different ways in order to attack whatever that change that you need to make. So I would use the minimum filter, or I would experiment with this decontaminate colors option at the bottom. Another great question.
Perfect. Question from Daniel now. Daniel asks, after creating the smart object from the multiple layers, how do you get access to the previous layers to adjust, tweak, change, or replace?
Ooh, I love it. Okay, so let's pop open one of those collages that we did. We're going to shift-click to activate all the layers. Then we're going to control or right-click near the layer name and choose Convert to Smart Object. Now let's go ahead and do our filter again for our vignette. Now let's say we save that as a Photoshop document. We come back, and holy cow, we want to change that color overlay. All you have to do is either double-click the Smart Object layer or right or control-click and choose Edit Contents. And what Photoshop is going to do is it's going to open up a temporary document that displays your original layers. So we could come in here, double-click the black and white adjustment layer, and choose a different kind of color tint. Okay? Now the trick for this to work is to, as soon as you get through changing, those original layers, you're going to choose File, Save, because you cannot save this temporary document in another place, or Photoshop doesn't remember that it's linked to that smart object. Okay, so what it did is it just temporarily expanded those layers for us to edit in a temporary document. So you're going to choose File, Save, close it, and when we come back over here, your changes update automatically. So you can always expand a smart object to edit its original layers anytime you want.
Super. And looks like we have a question from Gary. Gary asks, how about adding a person into a photo where a linear gradient won't do it?
Great question. In that case, then I would use our hand-painted collage technique here, where you just add the layer mask and then use the brush tool, a soft brush set to paint with black, and you can hand paint it. Or you could have it go with the Refine Edge dialog like we did earlier. So those two methods would work.
Okay.
Or blend modes, If you're dealing with a white or a black background, you can experiment with blend modes too.
Thank you. Let's see. Another question that came in a little bit earlier was from Sharon. Sharon asked, would multiple lightning strikes be done pretty much the same? I don't recall what part we were on, but maybe you do, Lesa?
Oh, sure. We were using the blending sliders, So yeah, if there were multiple strikes within that same image, the black behind them would continue to drop out. Or if you continue to bring in different images of other lightning strikes, you could use the exact same technique.
Perfect. I'm not seeing any additional questions. So with that, Lesa, we are going to say a very big thank you to you for presenting yet another outstanding and fabulous webcast for us all.
Aw, thank you. It was fun.
Folks that attended, we thank you for attending our webcast today and hope you benefited from it. If you like what you saw today, Lesa's book has a lot more in it, lots of tips and good information and knowledge to help you in your day-to-day and to have you have fun with Photoshop as well. We did also push out Lesa's website and the link to the video site that she told you about. So please, if you haven't opened that group chat, do open it. There's valuable information there. Again, we thank you, Lesa. Thank you, everyone. This will conclude today's webcast. Goodbye, everybody.